Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. We discuss 6 questions in 9 minutes because leaders know how to be concise. We'll go ahead and get started with today's guest. Our first question, as always, is, in a few sentences, tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this. So I'm a former staffing executive and a co-founder of a company called the Villing Group. It's a national staffing firm that's headquartered in South Bend, Indiana, is where I happen to be right now. As the CEO of the company, I oversaw a compound annual growth rate of nearly 12%. The company was listed as the 35th largest staffing firm in the U.S. That's according to staffing industry analysts. Well, a lot of my success in the staffing world came as a result of developing a solid marketing strategy and executing on it, a solid execution of that plan. I'm certainly a believer in the power of marketing to take an average company and turn it into a dynamic one. And the proof of the pudding there is the fact that I actually acquired a marketing communications firm. So I believe it's kind of like the old, what was the old Victor Kayem? Some of your older audience might remember. He was the guy that bought the Norelco company because he loved the shaver so much he bought the company. So it's kind of like that deal. So again, we'll lose the millennials on that one, but the older folks will remember Victor Kayem. He also owned the New England Patriots, I think, as I recall. He owned the NFL team there for a while. But that's how strongly I believe in marketing and its ability to take a company and really turn it inside out and develop not only predictable, but in some cases very explosive growth, through execution of the proper strategies at the proper time. So that's how I got to where I am, and that's a little bit about me.
Well, that's great. Love that. Well, question number 2, what's the best part about working with a team?
Well, I think we're making an assumption here. So let me call out the elephant in the room. I think when we talk about a team or an effective team working effectively with the team, I think we're talking about a team that's properly structured. So I think it's extremely important that, and I want to talk about that in a minute. I think your next question will sounds like we'll dive into a little bit more of that. But I think the best things, I think there's 2 or 3 things that come out of that. I think first of all, a team, again, a properly structured team holds each other accountable. There's a certain level of accountability when you've got the right people in the right structure. Not only are individuals expected to hold themselves accountable, but the team will hold them accountable to whatever the expectation is. I think one of the other interesting things, or one of the other pluses about working with the team, is that a team can take an average idea or a good idea and can make it great just by the mere fact that you've got, multiple people providing thought and feedback and suggestions, and taking an idea that might start as something that doesn't sound so great, but when the team gets done with it, you've got something that could potentially be very powerful for your organization. And then the last thing, a properly structured team helps hold and establish a culture of contribution. So that team, again, if they have the right structure, the right expectations, they're holding each other accountable, they're coming up with great ideas and executing on them. It's sort of, as a byproduct, almost establishes a culture that expects a contribution from the team.
I love that phrase, culture of contribution.
Yeah,
I might steal that. That's a great phrase.
Well, that's fine. We use that phrase here, but that, when people ask, what's the culture at Villing and Company? Well, it's a culture of contribution. That's the expectation. Everybody knows that.
That's great. Question number 3, I hear from other team leaders that it can be a challenge to get team members engaged. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So that requires, I think we have to dive a little deeper. I think to get a team engaged, you've got to make sure, I think the critical factor is it all depends on who you invite to the team, right? Number 1. And number 2, what are the rules of the game? So to get a team engaged, first of all, I better have the right players, right? So I better be inviting the right people who support the idea of a culture of contribution. So right out of the gate, hey, these are the rules of the game. And if you're willing to support that, there's a place for you. So I think it starts there. But at Villing, we have a kind of a 5-step value agreement that everybody agrees to, and I think it will help unpack this a little bit. And we start by talking about, and it leads to the team idea, but it starts with the individual. Well, the 5 stages, let me just lay out the 5 stages and I'll give you a little bit more information on each one. So we start with me, then we progress to we, that progresses logically to us. That then the next step, the 4th step, progresses to them, and I'll explain what them is. And then finally, a global or perspective or everyone. So it's me, we, us, them, and everyone. So we start with me. So first of all, back to what I said a minute ago, the individual has to be accountable for themselves. And that means 2 or 3 things. It means, number 1, they're coachable. They're open to being coached. Number 2, they're committed to personal growth. And number 3, again, they have to be willing to hold themselves accountable. So that's just the individual. So now we haven't even gotten to the team yet, right? That's the individual. That's the player. That's the expectation on the player who's joining the team. Then we go to we. So we is that's the team. So then the team expectation is, number 1, to be truthful. So to have truthful, honest exchanges. Number 2, to put the team first. So that's a tough one, but that's, I think, one of the things that has to be part of the expectation of a highly functioning team, is that they will put the team first. And then number 3, that they will individually and as a team, they will honor their commitments. So the team makes certain commitments to a culture of contribution. That team will honor those commitments. Once you get that far, then I think you can start talking about the next stage, which is us. Now, when I say us, I'm talking about, now we're looking at the marketplace, or we're talking about clients. Let me take that back. I think that them is the client phase. I think when we talk about us, we're talking about the organization. So we've gone from the individual to the team to the organization. So what's the organization expectation? Well, that we're dealing with clients that want to work with us. We're dealing with clients that are profitable. We're always looking at the end in mind. I love that phrase from Stephen Covey, that to begin with the end in mind. We talk about that a lot here. So you start with the end in mind and work backwards. And then, of course, the organization has to measure its performance as an organization. So individuals have to contribute have to be able to contribute. Teams have to be able to contribute, but the organization has to have a contribution as well, and has to be measured. Once you've done that, then we can talk about clients. So then you look outward towards the client, and there's 2 or 3 things there. We call them 3 R's here at Villing. It's relationships, results, and retention. So we develop and nurture relationships with our clients. We make sure that we're delivering, meeting or exceeding expectations, i.e. results. We're getting results for the client. And then number 3, that we're doing such a good job on those first 2 things that we've got a client that we can work with over the long haul. The client that we're retaining, that we're continuing to do work for on an ongoing basis. Then once you've done that, then you can start to look globally. And of course, this is a global world now with the internet and all of the digital connections that we have. So I think this is an extremely important part, that a lot of mission statements and value statements that I see with companies, they leave that off. And I think it's extremely important to have a global perspective. And again, it's something that is the expectation here of our team, and that is we support our community. So we're involved with the community. We support the community. Villing happens to do a considerable amount of pro bono work for some of the community, some of our community companies here, such as the Civic Theater and a couple other things, where we just provide work at no charge, because we think it's important to support the community. We also think it's important that you give back individually and as an organization at a global level. So what are we doing to give back to the global organization, to the global community? And then, of course, through all of that and through all of our efforts, through me, we, us, and them, we hopefully are putting a bit of a dent in the universe, to borrow Steve Jobs' phrase. We're shaping the future to the extent that we can. So that's how I think. I think if you think about it that way, or at least that's how we do it here. That's how we get our team engaged, is to break it down into those pieces. What's my individual responsibility? What's our responsibility as a team? What's our responsibility to the organization? What's our responsibility to our clients? And what's our responsibility to our world?
I really like how you kind of wove in the values along with some structure behind that to create this sense of this sense of culture that you referred to earlier, that culture of collaboration. That's a masterful job. That's really impressive. Well,
Well,
question, what, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just the addendum to that is this is one of those things. Don't try it at home. It's really easy to talk about, and as your question suggests, I'm not trying to suggest it's easy to do. It requires constant effort, but you at least have to identify where you're going in order to try to get there.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. You're right. Structure is good and it's necessary, but you can't just do it one time. It's got to be a repeated exercise, or it loses all value. So that's
Exactly.
great comment there. Well, question number 4, what other piece of advice would you offer to leaders of teams?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things, and pick your poison here, right? I think first of all, I've said this already, I'll say it again. I think it's extremely important that you select the right team members. And so when I say right, again, I'm coming from the staffing world. We place people in jobs all day long. For 32 years, I did that. So I'd like to think I know a little bit about that. And it's not that what's important is it's not all about the person. You hear a lot of people say, well, we got to hire the best quality person. That's where the rubber meets the road. Where the rubber meets the road is you have to first of all determine as I've said, what's the person you need for the type of organization you have. What's the person you need for the culture of your organization? That's the right person. So you find the person that fits. So I got a round hole, I got to find a round peg, not a square hole. So when I say select the right team members, it doesn't mean just the best person with the deepest resume. It means the person that fits from a skill perspective, but also from the soft skill or hard skill, but also from a soft skill perspective. So get the right team members on board. Develop a framework for expectations. Again, I think we've talked about that already. I think it's extremely important that everybody knows, okay, we're playing football. What are the rules of the game? You got to know the rules, or how can you win? Then I think once that you've laid out what the expectations are, then it's important that everybody understands that you measure, and then they understand that they have to contribute individually and as a team. So we're going to measure that, your contribution. We're going to look at that. We're going to talk about that. We're going to make sure everybody's contributing. That then will lead to, I think, having open and honest feedback and having feedback often. One of the things that, again, 32 years working with staffing in the staffing world, working with client companies, the one thing that we saw over and over again was the poor execution a lot of companies did on performance reviews, and having what I like to call the difficult conversations, having conversations with people and letting them know where they stand. And companies or leaders are afraid often to have that conversation because they think, oh, the person might quit or they're going to get mad at me. Or what I've found though is you're worse off if you don't tell them how they're doing when they're not doing well than if you do, because one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to say, you know what, you're absolutely right. I'm not performing up to my expectation or up to my ability, and help me. What is it I need to know in order to get back on track? Or they're going to say, you're full of you know what, and I'm out of here. So either way, it works. It wins because you made a bad selection on getting the right team member. But I think that's extremely important. Everybody knows what the expectations are, and it's being measured, and then we talk about them individually and as a group. I think the other thing that leaders need to do to have teams running at their optimal level is to look for teachable moments. They're all over the place. You can find a teachable moment every single day. And again, I think, leaders tend to, maybe overlook something where somebody didn't do it quite right. Well, that was okay. But I don't look at it that way. I don't look at it as trying to correct someone, as much as I do saying, hey, you know what, that was a pretty good job, but let me give you another suggestion on another way you might have approached that might work a little better. So looking for teachable moments, modeling the behavior that you expect. I mean, if you're not cutting it, why would you expect anyone else to live up to that? So I think that's extremely important that leaders need to understand. If they want the team to, what's the old saying? The speed of the team is the speed of the leader is the speed of the gang, or something like that, right? So I think it's extremely important that leaders model the behavior they expect from their teams. We talked about difficult conversations, and of course, the other thing is being consistent with the leader needs to be consistent with their message. So are you saying the same thing? Are people getting contradictory messages and not sure what the expectation is, and are you repeating yourself? That's another thing I think leaders don't do often enough. Whenever you give a speech, you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them then you tell them what you told them. And I think it's important that, I think leaders often think, well, I've said this before. They're going to think I didn't know I said this already. No, that probably half of them didn't even hear it. They didn't retain it. So it's extremely important that leaders are consistent with their teams as to what the message is that they're communicating, and that they emphasize that message over and over again. And you don't have to say it with the same words, but you say the same thing in different ways. So those are kind of some suggestions I would have for that.
Great insights. Thank you for sharing those.
Sure.
Question number 5, what other successful team leaders, such as yourself, would you like to recognize that have had a positive influence in your life?
Yeah, you changed that question up. I hadn't thought of it that way. There's a number of people that have influenced, and I've lost track of them, unfortunately, some of the leaders that I've worked with. One of them that comes to mind is somebody that I worked with at the staffing firm that when we were acquired by this larger company, one of the folks that worked with them that coordinated the U.S. Communication with the French company. It was a French company that acquired us. His name is Gilles Tanner. So he's French. He's a dual citizen. He's also United States citizen. He lives in Chicago. He was very influential in me developing as a CEO in the staffing world. And again, a lot of these things I'm saying are things that he believes in, the things that I picked up from him. But he was one of those leaders who didn't micromanage. You would kind of lay out, here's what the expectations are, and there's more than one way to get there. I don't care how you get there, what way you employ to get there, but the expectation is this is the end result. And he was very influential in my ability to, because I'm, like to keep my hands in things, and many leaders do, but I've been able to back off on that. I've been able to balance that, maybe is a better way to say it, as a result of working with Gilles and seeing him do that. So that's probably the biggest contribution that he's made to me, is to be able to, to know when to get involved and when not to get involved.
Well, he sounds like a great individual, so thank you for mentioning him. Excuse me. Well, final question. Tell us a little bit about your first job.
Yeah, okay. Well, I right out of school, I was Ball State, Muncie, Indiana. My first job was in consumer finance. It was a company called Barclays International. Barclays is still around. They owned consumer finance company. A consumer finance company is basically a lending institution that basically lends to folks that aren't going to qualify for like a bank loan. Their credit may not be quite as good. The interest rates are much, much higher. At the time I was doing it, the usury rate was 36%. So we could charge all the way up to 36%. Can you imagine a loan at 36%? But it was a reflection of their credit worthiness or lack thereof. And there were folks that needed, they needed the money, and it was a very interesting opportunity to learn how to run a business, and we had our own P&Ls, learned a lot about finance and that kind of thing. But I had a particular incident. One of the things one of my first jobs was we had to collect the loans. We made the loans, but we had to collect them. Of course, that's the payoff, right?
Part, yeah.
And again, some of these folks were a little more difficult to get payments from than others. We would have to actually physically go to folks' homes, knock on their doors, and ask them for a payment. This was in downtown Indianapolis, so it was kind of rough. But one of the ones that I always remember was he was a preacher. We made a loan to a preacher, and I had to go to his house and ask for a check. And he came out of the house and met me about halfway on the sidewalk as I was coming up the door. He had his Bible in his hand, and I'd never met him before. I talked to him on the phone, but never met him. And I just said, well, I'm here to, your payments, 3 payments past due or whatever. I've got to collect, I need to get a commitment from you or get a check or something. And he started going off on me, and I don't remember what all he said, and hit me with his Bible. And that was about the time I turned and took off. So I never did get a check. I didn't get a commitment. My manager, however, got this guy as soon as I got back and told him what happened. We didn't have cell phones, of course. So had to go back to the office, told him what happened. And he immediately got this guy on the phone and said, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. If that ever happens again, we're going to file charges against you. That's battery. And from then on out, he always paid on time, never had to go to his house. He was the nicest guy. You pick up the phone and call him, and he was the nicest could be. It just, that one particular moment wasn't a good time for him and ended up not being a good time for me. And so got baptized by the Bible, I guess you could say.
Well, that's an interesting story, to say the least.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah,
So,
kind of interesting.
very much so. Well, Jay, thank you so much for being on our show today. How can people find you?
Yeah, email jay@villing.com. They can also go on the website, villing.com. I've got contact information there. And of course, they can look up Jay Mattern, Jaymattern on LinkedIn. I have lots of posts and content, and they can contact me there. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Fantastic. This
Right.
is Sean Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, you can find us on LinkedIn by searching Blue Sky Business Consulting. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.